new cameras here. Now I am truly a YouTuber. Ooh. Why are these manuals in Japanese? What the fuck are these, rocks? This just says herbal medicine. Ah, The Camera Obscura by Canon. Fatal Frame. Just that name alone makes me f***ing
moist.
So much better than Project Zero, as it's known beyond the Western Hemisphere due to a clerical oversight. Or even its true Japanese name,
Zero.
What is Fatal Frame?
Welcome to Video Ouija.
Spirit from this house. Come out and play with me.
Fatal Frame is a date with a hot Asian goth girl. It's Eastern Allan Poe. It's a J-horror remake of Ghostbusters. Fatal Frame is a midnight stroll through a forest of cherry blossoms, or a haunted Zen garden, or an oriental graveyard. Fatal Frame is an M-rated Luigi's Mansion. It's Okami on Halloween. It's Pokemon Snap with only ghost types. To paraphrase Chekhov, Silent Hill is my wife, but Fatal Frame, she is my mistress. Fatal Frame is one of my very favorite games, one of the greatest survival horror games, and often considered the utmost scariest games of all time. All games of the name Fatal Frame are basically the same. You play as an adorable Japanese girl exploring some location in northeastern Japan haunted by ghosts who died in occult rituals that sealed the gates to hell. Searching for answers in a lost loved one, your only defense is a supernatural camera. The series debuted in 2002 on the PlayStation 2. All 5 titles were developed by Koei Tecmo, directed by Makoto Shibata, and produced by Keisuke Kikuchi, who together were galvanized by Silent Hill to not only design a fun game or tell a captivating story, but first and foremost to create the most frightening experience possible. The first is a solid classic that set the framework, the second is the perfect sequel, and 3 is the weird one whose weirdness sets it apart. Then in 2012, for reasons that still confuse and amuse me, Nintendo purchased a majority stake in the franchise and became co-owners. I only wish they were making better use of it. A 4th installment, inspired by and exclusive to the Nintendo Wii, was another masterstroke and even co-directed by Suda51, but it was never released outside Japan.
Why?
Then there was that crappy 3DS spin-off, and then the 5th entry was diluted into a AA digital eShop budget title. Since then, the series itself has been a ghost. Fatal Frame was never a blockbuster, but to this day is considered a darling of survival horror, an occult classic, a sister of royalty deified beside Resident Evil and Silent Hill. I wanted this video to be a turning point for me. I wanted to step my editing game up to the highest production value. Aptly, I even wanted it to be the first video I use my new camera for. Because I love this channel. I love you guys. I love me. But most of all, I love Fatal Frame. So precisely what makes Fatal Frame the scariest games ever?
Japanese.
Dad, shh. They're called Asians now.
Among its influences include Shibata's own dreams and encounters with the supernatural, actual urban legends, war films, The Shining, and of course, Japanese horror. To understand one is to understand the other. Deeply rooted in traditional Japanese ghost stories are tropes that have become common in Japanese horror films and games. Japanese people don't really fuck with zombies or vampires, just ghosts.
What?
Historically, female ghosts with long black hair.
You okay?
Well, that in kaiju films. An archetype known as the vengeful spirit, They're often climactically revealed to be the victim of a past tragedy, whom the protagonist must aid so the spirit can rest peacefully. Disturbing images are relayed out of context until connected later like a puzzle. Modern themes like technology clash with traditional themes like religion.
That's not a cell phone. Wait, no!
And it cultivates an atmosphere of tension and suspense in which you're not only spooked when something does happen, but also constantly on edge that something might happen. Now, Silent Hill was the first and really the best to achieve these principles, and they can be found in many survival horror games to varying degrees, but none more so than Fatal Frame. Like a photo from its obscure camera, it perfectly captures the essence and style of Japanese horror films. More than many PS2 games, the graphics have aged exquisitely. Smooth textures, nice resolution, tight frame rate. The creases in the wood, the grime on the walls, the particle effects in the air and on surfaces. The grain fits the tone and gives an aged film vibe, like you're viewing the game through the camera obscura itself. And the sequel's inflated budget enabled CGI cutscenes and better voice work. The weakness of the Wii scaled everything in 4 down a touch, but 5 shows how amazing this series could look in HD. There's a detailed attention to realism that shapes the tense pacing. Like those luscious room-to-room transitions, you have to slowly and manually open the doors and walk through them. Except for the best entry, which for some reason used abrupt jump cuts, or how the characters don't run but just do a light jog.
Because a girl runs like a girl with the little steps and the arms flailing out.
Or the delicate asset collision. Look how they go up the stairs one step at a time.
That's what I call craftsmanship.
I mean, San Andreas is the biggest budget PS2 title, and CJ looks like he's goddamn rollerblading up these fucking slopes. How can I describe the camera work in this series?
Ooh, baby, yeah, baby, ooh, baby. Yeah, baby, yeah, baby, nah, baby.
Oh my god!
Ooh, yes, 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 baby. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Uh-huh, baby.
Yeah, it's good.
How do you feel, Rosemary?
Much like Silent Hill, Fatal Frame's camera work is just masterful. Every cinematic technique is on display here, folks. The camera angles are a big part of how the game sets up spooky ghost encounters. And I love how the sequel used a lot of negative space to emit a sense of disconnection. But sadly, even this faithful franchise couldn't resist looking over their shoulder. They're still spooky, but not as visually festive. And of course, the most frequented and noteworthy is the point of view shot, entered every time you raise the actual in-game camera. Confronting these ghosts face to face with zero peripheral vision is so much creepier than it would be in third person, and I feel this central aspect of the game is its scariest. All in all, it's as if these games were shot with the camera obscura itself. These games are legibly dark, with dim light sources like candles and moonlight. Of course, a game like this is gonna have extremely moody lighting. Thematic color palettes accent every entry. The original's key colors are black and white, symbolizing fear and hope. Blasts of red represent the blood between twins. Blackish gray reflects the nightmare within and without an otherwise normal colored reality. And by far the best lighting feature is the ability to control the flashlight. Man, this is good gameplay. Although most survival horror games were developed by Japanese studios, most of them took place in the Western world. But Fatal Frame was the first to be set in the land of the rising sun. Japanese architecture, kimonos, a skrillion candles, freaky-ass dolls, the occult, samurai stuff, and brutal acts of violence. But if there is one setback to the scare factor of the whole series, it's the repetition of these set pieces. Everything is so Japanese that you get accustomed to it, and it even loses some of its exotic appeal. The architecture, the interior design, the fucking dolls. I typically play horror games dreadfully slow, but whenever revisiting this series, I find myself blitzing through large portions.
You gotta run like a man! Get your knees up!
When I replay Fatal Frame, at first I'm like,
I love Chinese crap. Lucy Liu, Nintendo, Gangnam Style, sushi, etc., etc.
but by the time I'm halfway through 3, I'm like,
You people are a circus.
it might drop from 11 to 7, but that's still a solid 7. And to be fair, 3, 4, and 5 mix things up with a few modern settings. The sound design is a major factor in these atmospheres, so instead of describing it, I'll demonstrate it.
Bing bong!
The sound designers made heavy use of stereophonics to convey a three-dimensional surround sound that amplified the atmosphere so vividly that you could honestly feel things happening off-screen and you can feel where ghosts are teleporting. But listening to the Fatal Frame OST on its own? Well, if you want to turn any typically pleasant walk into a hideous ordeal, then it does the job. It fits the game perfectly and is arguably the strongest component of the atmosphere. But it seems like something a goth kid on death row would listen to. At least until the very end, where the only piece of digestible music resolves the nightmarish experience that is playing these games. Now a question looms. Which entry is the scariest? The original weighs heavy and truly crawls under your skin. It was so terrifying that many players were too scared to finish it. Tecmo responded to this not by making the sequel any less scary, but just making the story more interesting so players felt compelled to see it through to the end. And Crimson Butterfly is often name-dropped as the scariest game of all time. The Tormented balances a softer, subtler terror of Ray's apartment with the intimidating challenge of the Dream Manor, and I can only assume that Lunar Eclipse and Black Water are both plenty creepy. They're all scary in similar ways while retaining their own subtle identities, but 2 is the scariest. Kikuchi and Shibata embarked on making the scariest gaming experience possible.
Crazy son of a bitch, you did.
It cannot be overstated just how fucking frightening these games are. They possess such an uninviting aura that emerges from the screen and drags you in the second the disc starts spinning. You could feel the presence of ghosts even after their deaths. Something Shibata considered an indicative trait of horror. Fatal Frame sports one of, if not the, most oppressive atmospheres in survival horror. And what's more impressive is that they likewise managed to craft some very fun games to play. In a world where all the classic survival horror series have deviated from their sacred formulas, Fatal Frame is commended for remaining loyal to everything besides the camera work. Well, of course, this series' gameplay is so unconventional to begin with that the only way to convert it into an action game is to take that camera and beat ghosts over the head with it. But we'll get to combat later. As the PS2 ushered in the golden age of horror games, the first ghost you'll find is the death of tank controls.
And good riddance.
Silent Hill 2 was 6 months earlier, but instead of including the ability to turn the flashlight on and off, Fatal Frame repurposed the right joystick to point it in radial directions. This is such a clever mechanic in the type of game where a free camera is sacrificed for a fixed camera, and the right stick often goes unemployed.
So good.
The face buttons fulfill the duties of action commands, running, menu access, and raising the camera, which itself has its own input scheme, although there's so many configuration options that they should have just added full customization. Fatal Frame is also the first horror game to go, hey, let's have a health meter that's not total bullcrap. Recovery items take the 2 forms of herbal medicine and the fully restorative sacred water. Another item is the stone mirror, which automatically revives you like the fairies in Zelda. Save points are represented by stationary cameras, while save files are interpreted as shots. This cool little detail is later abandoned for f***ing lantern posts. In 4, you can actually buy things from them like health items, which I find softens the survival and makes no fucking sense. It's like a little shop inside the lantern. A journal keeps log of all collected scraps, documents, photos, and even a correlation chart, and as a journalist, the protagonist of 3 keeps a second personalized journal. Even something as routine as the map is just pleasing to look at. with its aged paper and thick borders and exotic room names.
Solarium.
Good God, these words.
However, instead of naturally drawing attention to themselves as they are, all items appear in-game as very obvious balls of light glared by a sun that never shines. Fatal Frame may be cursed with hauntings, but it is blessed with brilliant level design.
Oh, Christ! True level, bitch.
The Himuro Mansion is such a gorgeous estate that I would live there despite it being haunted. Step aside, Spencer Mansion, because this evil residence cements the original Fatal Frame as the premier haunted house game. All Gods Village is the ultimate sequel. Big, beautiful, badass, and bone-chilling. An open-world village with 3 massive mansions and 2 little mansions, a graveyard, a temple, a mysterious rock formation, and an underground network of tunnels. And then the Manor of Sleep is so bonkers that I don't know if it was a conscious decision or a drunken tirade that ended up working out really well.
As of now, it's his responsibility. You, sir, are the greatest artist who ever lived!
I mean, the location takes place in a dream, and the whole labyrinthian nature of the place represents the surrealism of dreaming so well, with all the sporadic extensions and random crawlways. I even find it more difficult and overwhelming than the previously larger village. I mean, who designed this nut house? MC Escher? Honestly, the level designer should be either in therapy or an asylum.
Come on, where is it? I know it's here.
This place is like the water temple without water. And you know what? I don't care what people say, I liked the going back and forth between the manor and the room. I liked it in Silent Hill 4 and I like it in Fatal Frame 3. It grew increasingly haunted and split the rent with the original character whose own experiences leaked into the dream world. The Tormented also introduced multiple players with special abilities, and 4 and 5 kept all these things going with a sanitarium turned hotel and a lakeside mountain village. In addition to the obligatory keys and locked doors, another form of progression is haunted photography. Some passageways and containers are sealed not with an earthly lock, but with a curse. The filament glows, and the door gets all swirly. You snap a shot of it, but an image of a different location appears on the photo. You must find this location and take a picture of it, thus breaking the curse. This can eat up film and feel like padding, but it's a very fun and clever use of the game's core mechanic to shake up traversal. Besides, Metroid taught me to love backtracking. Between exploration and absorbing the story, there are 2 main activities: combat and
No puzzles, no puzzles, no puzzles, no puzzles, no puzzles!
The trilogy consists of a triad of puzzles. One is arranging key items in a certain order: candles, masks, Buddha statues, more fucking dolls. Then there's the Japanese equivalent of door codes. I know they were going for pure Japanese authenticity by using their number system, but this would normally otherwise be the type of thing that was localized with more than just a note. And then there's these increasingly difficult sliding locks where you match the right kanji symbols. These haunt me more than any stupid ghost. 4 lean toward numeric codes, tiles, and a piano, whilst 5 omitted puzzles completely.
Good riddance.
However, combat makes puzzles seem like some kind of game.
Gentlemen, look and behold!
The Camera Obscura. According to legend, their inventor Dr. Asu assembled several prototypes that were all different, which is why each game has a different one with its own appearance, finder, functions, film gauge, and parameters. In other words,
There are many like it, but this one is mine!
when raised into position, the player enters first person, aptly named Viewfinder mode, whilst the wider world is dubbed Field Mode. And through a glass darkly, a screen of amenities links the player to the spirit realm. A crazy innovation underscoring the camera is the inverse joysticks.
The right one controls the avatar, while the left one controls the camera.
This is your right. You're gonna die.
Hey, this is some good TV.
This role reversal is meant to disorient the player and amplify their anxiety. At first, it's kind of frustrating, but it quickly becomes second nature while retaining its scariness. The face buttons now function to scan faster, a super useful 180-degree turn, and snap a shot, which can also be done with the right bumper. Cameras need film like a gun needs ammo, and the film is gauged into tiers with numbers indicating not aspect ratio but exorcismal strength. But the most intricate aspect is the upgrade system. It's like a little shop inside the camera. Within each camera are varying sets of basic and auxiliary functions. Basics are basically specs like range, speed, accumulation, and sensitivity. Auxiliaries are a wide array of offensive and defensive mechanics. They're sealed inside the camera and must be earned with spirit points, or found in the form of lenses, or unlocked through achievements. Basics and auxiliaries can be leveled up with a spirit orb and increasing amounts of spirit points, which are gathered by photographing ghosts. Every shot taken yields a certain amount of spirit points. The better the shot, the more you score and the more damage you inflict. One factor is the amount of spirit power charged in the meter. The original is time-based, while the others depend on distance. Another is the use of auxiliaries during the shot. The most powerful shot, prompted in the fragmented moments a ghost is either vulnerable or attacking, is where the game gets its name, the Fatal Frame, or as it's known in the original and the rest of the world, the Zero Shot. The sequel expanded on this with a wider variety of shots and a combo system. Stacking auxiliaries and fatal frames on top of each other to rake in the big points is the key to scoring that coveted S ranking. And you cannot score enough points to fully unlock the camera in a single playthrough. So when replaying a cleared file, it retains all the previous upgrades and completes the remainder. Some even have tiers that can only be unlocked after a cleared file. And finally, there's the driving force of the whole game.
Spooky ghost!
Ghosts fall into two classes. The first are benevolent spirits who linger after death, longing to communicate. These are basically collectibles. These also fall into two subclasses. The first are stagnant energies lingering in corners and objects, waiting to be photographed into rest. The others are active apparitions that appear and vanish in a matter of seconds. They only appear once per playthrough, so you have to catch them fast. They're totally harmless, but freaky as fuck. Some are very loud and jarring. Others just quietly walk across from you, but it's so damn eerie. And in a cleared file, you receive a list to help you keep track and track down.
Oh my gosh! A floating shopping list!
The other class are the hostile ghosts who you fight to progress and survive. These are essentially enemies. All ghosts have their own attack and behavioral patterns. These punk-ass poltergeists crawl and dash and float, rapidly move around, vanish, and reappear elsewhere. The concept of ghost movement is very well implemented and keeps combat interesting and varied. Multiple ghosts haunt the screen at once, and no room is safe or permanently cleared, and you never know when they're gonna show up or how they're gonna surprise you. And there's so many that you're bound to forget some by the next playthrough. And unlike most horror games that force you to evade enemies, most ghosts are required to battle. You can't even try to run because the characters run so slow and they put hexes on the doors or follow you through walls. That's not a glitch, that's a tactical advantage. And each one feels like its own thing that it's hard to tell the normies from the bosses. In the end, it culminates into the weirdest, craziest, scariest take on the FPS. Speaking of culminations, there is a significant amount of endgame content. A cleared file scores the player numerous rewards and unlockables across all titles. A sound test, costumes, battle modes, mission modes, the ghost list.
I'm not a shopping list! I'm a ghost!
Camera functions, chapter selection, and the hardest difficulty setting, Nightmare Mode. Fatal Frame has a solid and satisfying network of gameplay and a gratifying amount of content that are not just fun, but terrifying in their own interactive way that only video games, specifically horror games, can achieve. The controls are dividedly intuitive and disorienting. The mechanics are a fresh spin on classic tropes. The level design is engaging. The puzzles are... and the combat, well, it's the cherry blossom on the sundae. Fatal Frame is a horror game where you take photos of ghosts. It's unique, scary, fun, and one hell of an elevator pitch. Most survival horror games were made in Japan, so naturally they utilized the tropes of Japanese horror, but they were often set in America. Fatal Frame, however, is pure, uncut Japanese. This circles back to what I said before. Every Fatal Frame is more or less the same. Many people find this to be the series' biggest weakness, and it does seem uncreative when the only thing that changes is the terminology. But there is some well-researched source material, underlying themes, and a very intricate continuity. And there is a lot of information that I tried to condense into a digestible story, and the timeline is haunted by a distinct lack of dates. And honestly, the Japanese names are hard as hell to keep track of, let alone pronounce. So I'm just saying, this is gonna get long and hard.
Really? Nothing.
The Japanese believe that parallel to the world of the living is the world of the dead. It goes by many names, and there are several thresholds, with several Shinto rituals used to seal them. No one knows how long ago they started, but as of the 5 games, there are 5 known. In the Mutsu region, the wealthy landowning Himuro family were the guardians of the Hell Gate. Every 10 years, a series of 3 rituals occur. On November 26th, the Blinding Ritual, in which a woman's eyes are punctured with a spiked mask, is immediately followed by Demon Tag, in which the blinded woman plays a game of tag with all Himuro girls of age 7. The first girl caught is chosen to be the next Blind Maiden, and the last is destined to be the next Rope Shrine Maiden. She is kept in relative isolation for 3,669 days until the November 26 rituals are performed again and December 13th. When she is bound by 5 ropes to a mechanism that, when pulled by 4 priests and the family master, tear her limbs off. The rope is then carried to the Hell Gate to seal it in the ceremony of ropes. Elsewhere in the Mutsu region, the Kyusei family long protected their shrine, which prevented the pain of the dead to curse the dreams of the living.
I don't...
This was done through a series of rituals umbrellaed under a central one, the Piercing of the Soul, in which a woman is tattooed from head to toe with a snake and holly tattoo throughout the winter and then impaled into an eternal slumber. In the Mikomori region, a mountain village sealed their own Blackwater gateway with perpetually drenched girls who would assist people with a peaceful and proper suicide.
I can't,
They are laid into reliquaries and submerged in the black water, where they would mummify and prevent the black water from overflowing. A secondary ritual called ghost marriage, where her husband is placed with her, enhanced her power. Below a remote village known by 2 names lies the Hellish Abyss, guarded by a clan of 5 families. These inhabitants believe twins to be one being whose soul split at birth, and when one kills the other, they reunite and become closer to the gods. When 2 twins around the age of 15 are chosen to be twin shrine maidens, they are taken to the Hellish Abyss, where the older twin strangles the younger one. The younger twin turns into a crimson butterfly to watch over the village, and their body is cast into the chasm, while the older remains alive, so traumatized by their loss that their hair turns white. The ritual is held approximately once every few decades, and in case of its failure, an emergency ritual called the Hidden Ceremony temporarily placates the abyss before a proper crimson sacrifice can be offered the next year. In this ritual, a village outsider is imprisoned, brutally tortured, and chucked inside, forgotten and remembered as a kusabi. On the island of Rujetsu, a ritual called the Karaigu revolved around the mask of the lunar eclipse to be worn by the Otsuwa after 100 days of meditation for her and rehearsals for her 5 musical backups, the Kanade.
What?
This ritual would not seal, but in fact open a gateway to the spirit realm on the night of an eclipse. It was held every 10 years on September 17th, until the time an inferior mask botched the ritual and the Getsuyu syndrome broke out in the Day Without Suffering. Since then, the ritual was diluted into a safe, decorative festival called the Rujetsu Kagura, but its legend still lingers. And basically, the stories of Fatal Frame are set in motion by the 19th century failures of all these rituals. On November 26, 1827, the blinding and demon tag rituals were held once again, and a girl named Kyrie became the next rope shrine maiden. She was isolated from the world for 10 long years, but on that final year, a man who came to Himuro Mansion as a guest met her. They fell in love and spent much time together until he was forbidden to continue seeing her. For his defiance, the family master ordered him murdered. The priests killed him and told Kyrie he had gone home, but she knew they were lying. Her guilt and her newfound will to live caused the strangling ritual to fail. The laceration rope wasn't strong enough to seal the Hellgate, causing the malice to pour out in the calamity. Over 1,000 people died, and their spirits would linger and haunt Himuro Mansion for over a century. Around that time, a very important man is born. Dr. Kunihiko Asu grew up near the mountainous region of Mikomori. A childhood experience with the Black Water ritual set him on a course to become a doctorate student of engineering and psychiatry with a burgeoning interest in folklore and ghosts. A new French invention called the camera caught his eye after superstition spread that photographs can capture the spirits, and he began to create a camera for that very purpose. He became a well-known part-time post-mortem photographer and was invited to Mount Hikami, where he made the sad mistake of falling for a girl chosen as the next sacrifice. Even more sadly, the ritual failed because of a massacre. Mount Hikami was flooded by black water, and he never returned. As he continued and combined his career and passion, he befriended a few colleagues with similar interests. One of these was Akito Kashiwagi, who he likely gave his first camera to. In his travels, Akito was invited to the Kyuzei Shrine. Men were occasionally brought to produce female heirs, but Akito fell in love with his partner Kyuka, daughter of the family master, Yashu Kuze. After researching the family and their fate, he planned to help Kyuka escape, giving her a pair of telepathic earrings and promising to return. But he never did, because Yashu murdered him, aware of his plans. Their child ended up a boy named Kaname, but since men weren't allowed to live there, boys were exiled or even killed at the age of 4. To prevent this, Kyuka snuck him into a neighboring village where he's adopted, and she gave him one of the earrings. As the years passed, she bore a daughter named Amane and did nothing but brush her hair while waiting for Akito and her son to return. Kaname grew up unaware of his roots, and one day he left the village for the city, but intended to return for his childhood love, Reika Yukishiro. However, an unspecified disaster struck the village, killing her whole family. Several orphan girls were adopted by the Kyuzei family, and along with Amane groomed into handmaidens, while Reika was offered the chance to be the next tattooed priestess. As she underwent the rituals, she told Amane all about her earring and Kaname, before being put to sleep in the Chamber of Thorns. In her eternal dreaming, she connected to Kaname, who was unaware of what transpired. He began to dream of a strange old manor that left him with urges to return home, so he consulted the psychiatric help of Dr. Asu. But during a recorded interview, his urge grew so strong that he abruptly departed, leaving his belongings in Asu's house, including one of the earrings. Upon his return home, he learned what happened and made for the Kyuzei Shrine. Amane recognizes her own half-brother from Reika's stories, so she disguised and snuck him into the chamber where he awakened Reika. Their happy reunion was cut short, however, as Yashu murdered her own grandson in front of his love's eyes.
Damn, that was cold.
Which the tattoos entered due to her sorrow, causing the rift to spread in the unleashing. It spread slowly, giving Yashu enough time to hire carpenters to seal the shrine, sacrifice them, and have all the handmaidens impaled, including her own granddaughter.
Damn, that was cold.
But even she still succumbed to the rift. Dr. Asu would use Kaname's forgotten earring to modify a radio that used crystals to detect sound waves from the spirit realm. The Spirit Stone radio was his first successful experiment, and soon after he would develop several more prototypes for what he came to call the camera obscura. One of these was lent along with the radio to a close friend and fellow folklorist, Seijiro Makabe, unaware that he would never see his friend or his equipment ever again. But let's rewind a bit. During the events in the Mutsu and Mikomori regions, the mysterious history of Minakami unfolded in tandem. Besides a pair of captured and hung runaways, the Osakas and even the future village master Ryoken Kurosawa partook in the Crimson Ritual as per custom. When the Kiryu's turn arrived, the twins were unusually young, and Akane missed Azami so much that her father built a life-size doll in her likeness that ended up becoming possessed and destroyed the family. Eventually, the Takibana twins were born, followed in a year by the Kurosawa twins. As children, they were visited by a traveling merchant and his son, Ryotsu Munakata, who closely befriended the Takibana twins and exchanged letters over the next decade. The Takibana twins were so close that the ritual they dreaded ended in failure, which meant Yae and Sai were due to cover the loss. So Itsuki wrote a letter to his old friend Ryotsu, whose time in the village led him to become an aspiring folklorist with an apprenticeship under Seijiro Makabe. Ryotsu told Makabe about the letter, the village, and the ritual, and they set off together after that final visit to Dr. Asu. They were warmly welcomed by the village master, who saw an opportunity for a kusabi. As Makabe researched, Ryotsu just searched for his old friends, whom he was told died from an illness. Wishing to save Itsuki's friend, Yae and Sai helped them escape, but Makabe stayed behind as Ryotsu left early, promising Yae he'd return for them on the night of the ceremony. Makabe was then sacrificed as a kusabi. Now, while Yae wished to escape the ritual, Sai wished to endure it. So when the time came for Itsuki to help them escape through the forest, Sai fell behind as Yae escaped. Itsuki was imprisoned, and to the dismay of Sei and Shito, hung himself to return to his brother. Desperate to appease the rumbling abyss, Ryoken attempted something unprecedented.
There's no precedent, baby!
They hung the single twin and threw her inside. The ritual failed, causing the darkness to burst out in the repentance. The vengeful ghosts of Sei and Makabe slaughtered the entire village, which was swallowed and wiped off the map. Yae returned to find everything gone, and Ryotsu returned to find her crying by the entrance. They left together and never looked back. For the rest of his life, Dr. Asu traveled Japan to conduct research and perfect his camera. He visited Rujetsu Island, where he witnessed the Kagura festival and donated one of his cameras. Eventually, he wound up in the ruins of Himuro Mansion, searching for the Holy Mirror to complete his final camera. Unfortunately, he was never heard from again. Dr. Asu was shunned by the academic world, so his vast knowledge died with him. But in his subversive field, he was revered as a pioneer of what came to be known as mystical science, and his inventions were traded among curios, passed down the bloodline, lost and found by others, and they would come to play a crucial role in pacifying the many disasters of their time. In the 30 years since the events at Minakami Village, Ryotsu and Yae got married and had a daughter named Mikoto, and eventually moved into Himuro Mansion. While Yae recovered from an illness, Ryotsu studied the mansion's dark past, and Mikoto quickly made some new friends. During a game of tag, Mikoto was given Asu's camera by the ghost of Kyrie. Her parents think it's nothing special until Yae realizes its power and falls back to poor health. Mikoto and her friends were soon taken by the ghosts, who began to haunt her grieving parents. Yae hung herself in the atrium, and Ryotsu was killed. Mikoto is eventually found and is the only survivor. She has no memory of what happened, but she does have the camera obscura. She is adopted by the Hinasaki family. The next 50 years is marked by an era of peace.
There's 2 wars and a depression!
An era of relative peace, in which most of the major players of the game's events are born. In 1970, on Rujetsu Island, Mask maker Suya Yomotsuki and hospital director Shigeru Haibara rediscover and resurrect the forgotten Kiraigu ritual. 6 girls, including their own daughters Sakuya and Ruka, are kidnapped and tricked into secretly performing the real ritual during the festival. It fails and causes another outbreak of Gatsuyu syndrome. The 5 Kanade escape the island before Sakuya blooms into a ghost and takes everyone down with her. 8 years later, 2 of the Kanade girls mysteriously die, while the 3 survivors return home, and the events of the 4th game begin. The girls investigate their former hospital rooms, slowly recover their forgotten memories, and recreate the ritual after a showdown with Sakuya. All the restless spirits cross over, Ruka sees her forgotten father's face, and she returns to the mainland as Gatsuyu syndrome is finally cured. 6 years later, when novelist Junsei Takamine decides his next project a horror story, his study of Japanese folklore leads him to Ryotsu Munakata and Himuro Mansion. His editor and assistant accompany him there, and strange things happen immediately. They get locked in, harassed by the spirits, and find ropes in their photos. Koji is the first to die, followed by Tomo, and finally Mr. Takamine. A newspaper reports on the famous writer's week-long disappearance, and he is searched for by his protege, Mafuyu Hinasaki, who also never returns, prompting his sister Miku Hinasaki to search for him. And the events of the first game begin. When Miku arrives at Himuro, she finds the family camera, a holy mirror piece, and learns the fate of the novelist group. She discovers the story of the Munakata family and realizes that they are in fact her ancestors, and the family camera is one and the same. She finds 2 more mirror pieces and is once again attacked and assisted by Kyrie. After 3 terrifying nights of ghost busting, Miku uncovers the terrible history of the mansion. In her final battle with Kyrie at the Hellgate, the camera breaks, revealing the final piece of the holy mirror that Dr. Asu went there for so long ago. She uses the completed mirror to purify Kyrie of the malice, who accepts her role as the Rope Shrine Maiden, and Mafuyu accepts that his resemblance to her former love spared him and decides to stay with her. The calamity is absolved, and Miku escapes alone. She is taken in by Mafuyu's friend, Yu Asu, and his fiancé, Rei Kurosawa. Only a few months later, the spirits of Minakami begin to stir when a hydroelectric dam is planned on its site. A land surveyor goes missing, as does his worried girlfriend, but construction resumes. 1 year later, the area is visited by Mio and Mayu Amakura, twin girls who were born and raised there before their mother moved them away after their father was presumably taken by the local ghosts, and the events of the second game begin. They're lured into the lost village of Minakami, discovering the camera Dr. Asu lent Makabe and a whole lot of ghosts. They get separated as Mayu chases butterflies as if she's possessed, and Mio fights many but one of the spirits. They reunite for an escape, but are separated again. Mio finds the key only to find Mayu gone from the cell and crossing the Heaven Bridge, again as if she's possessed. She searches for her sister and, despite being ambushed by Sai, eventually finds her. Just as they're about to finally escape after all they uncovered, they are ambushed and taken into the hellish abyss. And in a trance-like state, they commit the Crimson Sacrifice ritual. Mayu becomes a butterfly, and the darkness is finally lifted. Mio is found alone in the forest, traumatized by killing her own sister. Her uncle Kei tries to leave her with his friend Yu, but she's too unstable and is hospitalized. Plus, they had just taken in another supernatural survivor, and within the same month, Yu is killed in a car accident caused by Rei's reckless driving. Horribly depressed, she only leaves home to work, and on September 7th, Rei and Miku visit the Kyusei shrine on assignment, but the dreams start to affect them, and the events of the third game begin. Night by night, Rei investigates the manor in her dreams as she learns their histories through a fellow victim who survived a local plane crash and from letters sent by Kei. She also explores her and Yu's own flat as the ghosts begin to haunt it. By this time, Rei, Kei, Miku are all afflicted with the tattoo curse, and every night of restless sleep they explore deeper into the manor as their dreams overlap, until one by one they fall comatose, trapped inside the dream. Rei gathers the necessary artifacts, defeats the ghosts of Yashu and Reika, and the rift is finally ended. And in the credits, the protagonists of the original trilogy can be seen finally meeting each other. And then shit gets weird. Miku somehow has an incest daughter with Mafuyu and names her Miyu before leaving to join in a ghost marriage with Mafuyu. Years later, the events of the 5th game begin when Miyu and some others lodge in an antique shop near the village. They pacify the restless spirits of the Black Water and save Miku.
How does this story end?
But we won't know what happens next until the next Fatal Frame.
I can't, what?
Firstly, when people say women are unrepresented in gaming, I'm just like, Fatal Frame only has female characters. Now this was a conscious decision made to complement the absence of conventional violence and is rooted in the Japanese notion that women are more spiritually attuned to the supernatural than men. The Fatal Frame femme fatales, as I affectionately call them, are just way too cute for their genre, with their big eyes and little skirts and dainty gaits.
The little steps and the arms flailing out.
Miku is my favorite one, and Rei is a little badass, and the twins' story is so damn sad. They're all just heroic, hot, and they mostly speak in anime grunts. Every single ghost is based on a dead character of the story. No generic enemies in these games. Their disturbing designs are modeled around their gruesome deaths, and are bound only by the ancient Japanese perception of ghosts. Yurei, yokai, Yahweh! Yokai! Well, even that doesn't work because ghosts are transparent, so I cannot stress how much of a stroke of genius it was to make photography the main system of defense. Spirit photography goes back to the late 19th century and persists today as a method for people to commune with the spirit realm. Remember when I mentioned the theme of religion and technology in J-horror? No! Northeastern Japan was historically known as the Demon's Gate, a place where spirits travel and several similar religions and legends existed. So it's a most appropriate setting. In addition to the proverbial written documents, a tape recorder and the Spirit Stone radio enhance the storytelling.
So this one time at Venice Beach, I met this hippie dude. And he was one of those guys who thinks rocks contain special qualities and energies, and he liked to talk to rocks. And at first I thought he was crazy, but now I understand what he gave me were just spirit stones. So I got my Spirit Stone portable speaker thingy. Let's see what these things have to say.
Classic! Total classic!
About Dio, God rest his soul.
Yeah, but will it do the ultimate song?
Last one.
The camera is even named after the optical phenomenon, which in turn acts as a metaphor. And apparently, even Asians think all Asians look alike. Despite an overarching chronology heralded by recurring characters, each game serves as a self-contained story. So what is Fatal Frame truly about beneath the surface? In addition to several overarching major themes, each entry focuses on its own minor themes as well. The original is about hope and fear, and according to Kikuchi, horror that appeals to the human imagination.
Mafuyu, thank goodness.
Crimson Butterfly is about symmetry and the tragedies and fears based on what happens when you tear things apart.
Don't leave me. We were born together. Please, don't leave me. But we have to live and die separately.
The Tormented makes clear allusions to Survivor's Guild with Rei and Yu.
These tattoos are my punishment for living. For living on. For surviving. That day.
And the environments are moist because dreams about water are thought to be the border between life and death. And 4 seems to be about PTSD, while 5 is clearly about suicide. However, The greater message hiding in the shadows of this series can be easily extracted from those aforementioned repetitive plot lines. Fatal Frame features themes of death, its effect on the living, and the savage religious extremism that can bubble from it. The reason all the rituals fail is because the sacrifices possess the will to live. Kyrie was in love. Yai wanted to be with her sister. Reika witnessed her partner being murdered. For the rituals to work, the sacrifices must embrace them and desire them.
Kill me.
And this sentiment is rooted in an ancient principle of Asian cultures. The idea that the individual life must be sacrificed for a greater purpose.
Leader, party, family, I'm a small part of a bigger thing.
It's why Japan is respectful. It's why China is communist.
The party is more important than the individual.
It's why Sai recognizes the ritual's purpose, while Yai finds it cruel and unusual, committing hellish acts to prevent hellish acts. So what can players glean from this experience other than a fun and scary little video game? Number 1.
You people are a circus.
Number 2. If your religion instructs you to kill people, that's a bad religion. And number 3. No matter how bad the haunted bogs of northern Japan are, they're still not as bad as China.
Fuck the Chinese government!
You know, I've used that clip in like 3 other videos, but I don't care. Fatal Frame told the same story 5 goddamn times.
Well, that was terrifying, but it felt so good to make this video. I feel like a weight was lifted off my shoulders, like I've sorted any unfinished business and my spirit can finally rest. The future of this series is as mysterious and frightening as its past. It was only ever a modest success, and if anything happens, it will be on a Nintendo platform. And the adult-friendlier reputation of the Switch is the prime opportunity to resurrect this beloved game. I'm still holding my hopes out for an HD collection of the original trilogy, a localization of the 4th title, a port of the 5th, and a brand new entry. Because I love Fatal Frame. Fatal Frame is Jade the Ghost Hunter. It's yokai camera. It's like if Peter Jacob from Eternal Darkness had an affair with a nurse when he was stationed at Okinawa after the war and returned to America, and then years later the nurse shows up to his door with Fatal Frame and says,
Ever since that day, I stopped seeing things that other people don't see.